918 will be the next hymn. We'll use it as the invitation hymn. And once again this evening, we are so thankful for the presence of each and every one. Again, we have visitors with us. We appreciate that so much. I realize that the study of Revelation is one that's maybe to some people of not much interest. But as Brother Malcolm mentioned in his prayer, and I appreciate his prayer and the fact that we're talking about one of the greatest books of the Bible. A book that sometimes people, when they come to, they just pass on over, thinking that it's too difficult. But there is that blessing in it, the blessing if we read and if we hear and if we understand the things which are written in this book. And so that's all we're trying to do here this week, is to help us to have a little deeper understanding. And I don't, as I said, I don't claim to know everything that there is, and what I know may not be much at all. But I hope to maybe to lead you in the direction that will instill within you a desire to study more, to be able to look into a little further. Because of the short time that we have, we realize that we can't cover every detail. We realize that, it would just take a lot of time to describe every horn and every head and so forth that you read about in this book. But we're trying to just kind of give you an overall picture. And last night we talked about the 7 churches. And we had kind of a time span in there, but it was kind of vague. I mean, but it does show. I think the 7 churches even reveal, the history of mankind. But tonight we get into the meat. We get into the real depth of the revelation of God. And we haven't read, or we're not going to necessarily study chapter 4 and chapter 5. But tonight, when you go home, in the quietude of your home, will you please read that and read it slow, because there's some beautiful words in chapter 4 and chapter 5. It's the first real vision that we get of Jesus Christ. Even though in the 7 churches, in each letter, it gives a title or says some little quip and quote about Jesus in every letter. Yet in this chapter 4 and chapter 5, we begin to see who Jesus really is. And we begin to see and look into that beautiful place that is called heaven. For in chapter 4, he says to John, "Come up hither, and I will show you things which must be hereafter." And John went up yonder. The Bible says in the next verse that he was caught up in the Spirit. And so John, I guess you could say, was a little more blessed than Paul. If Paul was the individual of whom he himself spoke in 2 Corinthians, the 12th chapter, when he said, "I knew a man who went into the third heaven and heard unspeakable things that he could not utter." Paul could not come back from that place and tell the things that he saw. But here John is able to reveal the things that he sees. And he sees in heaven the throne and him that sits upon the throne. He sees the Lamb of God who had been sacrificed for the world. He sees circled around this throne 24 chairs with 24 elders on them. Perhaps, and again, there may be different interpretations. This may be a representation of the 12 tribes of Israel, the 12 apostles. I don't know, but I'll just throw that out for whatever it might be. There's the 4 living beasts that are around that throne. And oh my, the angels. John had to be impressed with the number of angels that were there. In the 5th chapter of Revelation, he describes those angels. Now, the book of Hebrews just uses the word innumerable number of angels. Listen to the way Revelation describes it. He says, and the number of them was 10,000 times 10,000 and thousands and thousands. I said last night I wasn't good at math, but that's a lot of people. A lot of angels, rather, not people, but there's a lot of them, isn't it? John saw that. Can you imagine that? The street of gold and all these glorious things. But he saw here that in the hand of him who sat upon the throne, a book. A book that was sealed. As rolls, books in those days were usually scrolls and so forth, that many times they were sealed with a seal so that people would know when they were opened. But these seals were of the nature that no man could open them. It caused John to be sad. The Bible says he wept. The fact that no one could open this book, because, he'd been looking forward to this. Come up hither, and I will show thee things that will happen hereafter. He was expecting to see something, and now here's a book that can't even be opened. So he wept, the Bible says. And as he wept, then finally the information came forward that there was one who was able to open this book. And that's where we begin this evening here to look into this book. This book was not necessarily this book. This book was a book that contained the history of the world. At that time, it wasn't history. At that time, it was yet future. It was, I guess maybe we should say, it contained the plan for the world. It contained the way the world was going to go and things that was going to happen in the world. And so the book is the key to understanding the rest of Revelation. Because everything that John sees as the book is open is describing what's going to happen clear to the very end of time. It is the official document of the last days of human history. Folks, this book is a wonderful book. It's just grand because it has all of the accounts of human history within it. It is the climatic events of the universe. It is the world's future that you are about to have unfolded before your eyes. Why would you say that's not important? Because this book was important enough for God, who is on the throne, to hold and offer to one who was able to open it. The fact that God is holding the book shows several things about God tonight. I want to magnify Him first of all, because He is magnified here in these two chapters. God is the supreme authority over the end of the world. He is the one who gets to say how things happen. He is the one who gets to determine what happens and to allow what happens. He governs all the events of history. He holds the future in His hands. What's that song we sing? He's got the whole world in His hands. That's what God has when He has this book right there in His hands. He's got the whole world in His hands. He holds the destiny of the world within His hands. God is ready to carry out and to execute these events. All right? The book was revealed in prophecy. This book was no stranger to those who were prophets. They knew there was such a book. They knew there was such an information out there somewhere. For in Daniel, the 12th chapter, verse 8, it says, "And I heard, but I understood not. Then said I, O Lord, what shall be the end of these things? And He said, Go thy way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed till the end of time." Well, the end of time, you might think, well, that has to be, sometime yet still in the future. But the end times is what we're living in. And this book would be sealed until, I believe, the end times. We should feel privileged tonight to be able to see what's in this book. People before us have never had that opportunity. The prophets, you just think about this, old Daniel there, he didn't, because he wasn't allowed, the book was still sealed in his time and would be sealed to the ends of time. And there's old Isaiah and Jeremiah who predicted a lot of things, but they never got to see what was in this book. Folks, you and I in this building are the most privileged people on the face of the earth. We get to see what's on the inside of the book. We get to see what in other ages was not made known unto the sons of men, as it is now revealed in His holy apostles and prophets by the Spirit. I know this refers to the Bible, to the New Testament, but it seemingly fits, I think, the great book that is about now also to be opened. One is found to open the book. Revelations 5:5 says, "And one of the elders saith unto me, Weep not, behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David, hath prevailed to open the book and to loose the seven seals thereof." He is given two descriptive titles here, and titles that were given to him even by prophecy of old. In the words of Genesis 49, he refers to Judah as a lion's whelp. And this, of course, is the lineage through which Jesus comes. So He is the Lion of the tribe of Judah. In Isaiah 11 and verse 1 it says, "And there shall come forth a rod out of the stem of Jesse, and a branch shall grow out of his roots." So there you have the root of David and the Lion of the tribe of Judah. These were prophetic utterances made of Jesus Christ. And here He stands there at the throne. So now with this little bit of introduction, let's just get into the first seal. We've got Gail said when I sat down, she said it's a little thicker tonight than it was last night, and I went way over time last night. Malcolm, I couldn't even go home with Diane. I had to ride with somebody else. Anyway, we're going to try to get through this fairly quick, but we're only going to get through 6 seals is all we're going to do tonight. because there's a glitch. You know, I've been saying about the 4 parts and that each one of them have 7. There's a glitch in my theory. I have to admit that. Because what the 7 sealed book does is it goes through the 6 seals, and then there's a little period of time in there. When the 7th seal is opened, then it goes and there are the 7 trumpets that are blown. So my theory is mostly right because it's revealing periods of time. But the 6 seals are kind of separate. The 7th seal then goes back and starts over again and deals with things, I believe, that's happening to the church. The first seal, though, is this. Let's read each seal as they are opened, the account that is recorded there in our Bible, because I think we need to see this. The first 4 seals have to do with horses, and they have to do with horses of different color. For those of you who don't know what Pennsylvania language is, that's color to those of you who are in Texas here. But they are 4 horses of different color. And Revelation 6:1 and verse 2, it says, "And I saw the Lamb opened one of the seals, and I heard as it were the noise of thunder, one of the 4 beasts saying, 'Come and see.'" So he invites John to come and see what it was. "And I saw, and behold, a white horse, and he that sat on him had a bow, and a crown was given unto him, and he went forth conquering and to conquer." Now I want you to remember that we are talking about a historical view, and it's important to get this first seal. If we're looking at history, we have to get this first seal right so that every one of the other seals falls in place. We must keep in mind also that these seals have to do something with the church. Now, you may think that all that I'm doing here is teaching history, and that I'm a history teacher because we're going to be looking at Roman history. But Roman history is the history of the church. The Roman Empire was in existence for 476 years of the church. And again, put that in perspective, as I pointed out the other evening, America hasn't even been in existence for 250 years yet. So for 476 years, the church was under the power of the Roman Empire. Whatever happened in that empire that affected it in every way, whether it was pestilence, whether it was wars, whether it was hardships, persecutions, or whatever, that affected the church. It affected its growth. It affected, of course, how it would exist in every way. And in case you don't think that a government has power to control a church, your memory's not too long. Because the last 2 months, our government has controlled the church. They have controlled religion. And so the Roman Empire was much more powerful than that. They could stop whatever they wanted to stop. They could hinder whatever they wanted to hinder. And everything that happened in the Roman government would, in fact, indeed, have an effect upon the church. Let me tell you why. In the book of Daniel, in the 2nd chapter of Daniel, there's this story of the dream that King Nebuchadnezzar had, and the beast that was there that had different parts of his body, and each one of those parts was made of a different metal. And he goes down, describes, and then he describes what it is. And we know, again, according to history, what it was, that one nation was conquering another. And King Nebuchadnezzar, was the first king that was king of all kings. And then there was the Medes and the Persians that came and destroyed them. And then there was the Greeks that came and destroyed them. How do you destroy the number one power in the world? Only by God can that happen. And then finally it says here in verse 44, he says, "And in the days of these kings," this is when the Romans had destroyed, of course, the Greeks and had taken the power and became the rule of the world. And he said, "In the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom that which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever." Folks, this verse makes real sense to me when I tie it in with Revelation, and I see what happens. And the very thought that we've been talking about all week long here is that God prevails, and the church wins. And that's exactly what he said is going to happen. He says, the God of heaven shall set up a kingdom, and it shall destroy all these other kingdoms, and it shall stand forever and shall never be destroyed. So I know some people say, well, you think the church is ever going to be wiped out completely? You think it's ever going to be destroyed completely? No, I don't think so. Because the Lord said that it will stand forever. It might get pretty small, folks. And it might not be seen like we would like to see, when you think of churches and big cathedrals and so forth. That's not what the church is. But it will stand forever. The church will win. And that's what Revelation does for me. It points out the fact that the church wins. So, this church that we're talking about, even though we're going to be talking about the Roman Empire and things that happened in there, it is because it had a tremendous effect upon the church. So it's important to remember the history of the Roman Empire is much to do with the history of the church and the things that it endured. All right. Some think that the rider, let's go to this seal now. There was a horse. It was a white horse. It had a rider on it, and that rider had a bow in his hand, and he had a crown on his head. And some people think that this has to be Jesus. In the book of Revelations, the 19th chapter, Jesus is certainly the one defined there, who is on a horse, and he's got a crown on his head and so forth. So some people think this is Jesus, and he's talking about a victorious war that Christians might have won and so forth. But that's not the case. The crowns are different. In the actual language, in the actual Greek language, the crown that this one had in the first seal and the one that Jesus had in Revelation 19 is altogether different crown. In Revelation 6 and 2, the crown is Stephanos, a crown given as a reward for victory in battle. In other words, if a man went out and he won a battle and he come back to his country, they would crown him as the mighty warrior or whatever. But in Revelations 19 and 12, the crown is referred to as a diadem or diadem, a crown which is kingly in nature. And that's the one Jesus wore in Revelations 19. So this vision in Revelation 6 of a white horse with a rider with a crown on is not Jesus. That's not Jesus, because the crowns are different. The sword and the bow is also different. Anytime you see Jesus pictured or talked about, he has a sword in his hand. The sword we refer to often as the Word of God. And so he's got this sword. But this man on this horse, this white horse, does not have a sword. He's got a bow. Something altogether different than Jesus ever used or would use. All right. Now, in our study, we are going to be consulting a historian by the name of Gibbon. There's a book out there, The Decline and the Fall of the Roman Empire. I have that book. Again, it's about this thick, and if you've ever seen how I read very slow. And there's actually 3 volumes to the one that I have, and so I have not read it, but I have from other individuals who have read it and have taken the excerpts from it, and so I share those things with you. But Mr. Gibbon was a historian of the Roman empire. Now, he was not a Christian. He was not a Christian. So he wasn't tying it with the seals here or with the trumpets blowing or anything. He just writes history. So he has no reason to say that, this is the epoch of time, and he does not do this, that this is the epoch of time that Revelations is talking about. But I'll tell you what, if you read the accounts of the history written by Mr. Gibbon, you will see how it almost like he was divinely inspired to write it, almost. Because he just describes it in almost exact detail to the way that the Bible describes it, even though he had nothing to do with the Bible. In fact, some said he was an atheist, but he describes the seals perfectly. So we'll be looking at some of the things that he had to say. Now, the white horse. A horse, when you find it in, remember this is apocalyptic literature, which simply means there are visions, pictures, symbols, and so forth that is used to describe something. All right, so in this case, the horse in this type of literature would always refer to a war. When there was a horse in the picture, referred to some war, some battle that was going to be engaged in. The fact that it was a white horse would suggest to those who were considering this it was a victorious war. A white horse would be considered a victorious and a prosperous war. John was sent to the island of Patmos about AD 95, 96, and that's when we believe these things were written. This was at the end of the reign of Domitian. All right, the period following Domitian's reign, AD 96 to 180, and I don't have this on your paper if you want to write it down, but in AD 96 to 180, I believe is described by historians as a time of prosperity and military strength. It has been considered as one of the greatest times of the Roman Empire. So this next 100 or so years after the church, the Roman Empire just grew rapidly because of certain individuals who were the emperors. There were 5 emperors in that period of time. There was Nerva, Trajan, Hadrian, and the 2 Antonines. And these 5 emperors had ruled in such a way and had conquered in such a way as they went about. There were wars that were going on, but they were able to conquer so many different countries and peoples, and the Roman Empire grew monetarily. It grew in area-wise and so forth because of the efforts of these individuals, because of these men. And I want to read to you here what Mr. Gibbons says about that time. He says, if a man were called to fix the period in the history of the world during which the human race was most happy and prosperous, he would without hesitation name that which lapsed from the death of Domitian to the ascension of Commodus. The vast extent of the Roman Empire was governed by absolute power under the guidance of virtue and wisdom. That's what Mr. Gibbons says about it. It was a great time. There was prospering during that time. Now, here's another sign, the bow. You know, the Romans usually, even in war, would use a sword or a javelin. That was their form of warfare. So how would the bow fit into this scenario of the Roman Empire? Well, with the change of the line of emperors, a new era was ushered in. Domitian, of course, was out. Nerva was in. He was the next emperor to do this. Nerva was the beginning of this era of time in which 5 emperors would reign, and he came from the island of Crete. The island of Crete was noted for their bowmanship. In fact, the bow was their national anthem. So again, I may be just drawing at straws here, but there's some things that just kind of tie together with this period of time. Now, what does that mean for the church? Well, last night I said that during this time there was great persecution, and there is, because you'll notice in my time span here, we've kind of slowed down. You know, before we get to the year 300, we're going to come to that persecution. But here for a few years, and again, this ties in so beautifully with what we said about the church at Ephesus. You know, they kind of let down their guard. The church at Ephesus had lost their first love. They weren't fighting like they had to fight because they didn't have to fight. Everything was good and going well and so forth. So I think they kind of just lost their spirit, you know, of fighting against the Romans and the Jews because of these next 5 individuals who would rule the kingdom. And so the Roman Empire, again, it's important to mention that even though the symbols refer to the military achievements, it does affect the church. So I think that is this period of time right here. The church indeed was affected in that it had a little reprieve here just for a little bit. And the fact that, but again, that was a kind of a dangerous thing because they began to lose their fervor and their spirit and the fight that they one time had. Let's go to the second seal. Revelation 6, 3 through 4. And when he opened the second seal, I heard the second beast say, "Come and see." And there went out another horse that was red, and power was given to him to set thereon to take peace from the earth, and that they should kill one another, and there was given him a great sword. So here's this horse running that is a red horse, and power was given on it to kill. Where do we find, or how do we come to this particular time? Once again, the horse represents a battle. It represents something, a war that was going to take place. The color was red, which would represent blood, meaning that there would be great bloodshed that would be shed in this period of time. the peace would be taken away. That's what it did say. The peace that they had enjoyed for these first 5 emperors here after John would be taken away. And Gibbon, once again, describes an event that would fit this time span. Let me show you how he describes it. With Commodus, which is after the Antonines, Commodus comes into power. And Commodus, he commenced the third and the most calamitous period, which lasted for 92 years, from 192 to 284. During that period of time, just in 92 years, 32 emperors and 27 pretenders hurled themselves from the throne. They killed one another. They just fought for the power and so forth. So, you think about 32 men, just the 32, let alone the 27 pretenders, in 92 years, that's a lot of changes that takes place. And there was a lot of civil war. He says 92 years of incessant civil warfare taught the world on what a frail foundation the virtue of the Antonines had placed the felicity of the empire. Well, and you just think about how that would affect the church, the civil war that was going on within the empire itself. Well, Christians aren't involved in those things. Christians aren't involved in government and so forth. You say, well, but still, think about the civil war in our country. Did that not affect brethren? Did that not affect the church? I wasn't there in 1860, 1830 when the Civil War was going on. But I'll guarantee you it affected. You talk about, the South and the North being separated now. The North and the South were surely separated back at that time. So it had to affect the church and the relationship and the fellowship that brethren would have with one another. Not only that, but because of the killing that was going on, there was no true rulership, leadership, and so there's just a lot of terrible things going on. Gibbon gives vivid details of this period of time, claiming that 30-plus emperors all were murdered except but a few. The rulers slew one another with the sword, and the peace and the prosperity that the empire had was now gone because they were fighting amongst themselves and destroying themselves. It at least fits into our time span of the seal number 2. All right, the third seal, Revelation 6, verses 5 through 6. And when he had opened the third seal, I heard the third beast say, "Come and see, and behold, and lo, a black horse. And he that sat on him had a pair of balances in his hand. And I heard a voice in the midst of the 4 beasts say, A measure of wheat for a penny, and 3 measures of barley for a penny, and see thou hurt not the oil and the wine." If you know anything about the Civil War of the United States, one of the most difficult things that they had was providing food for those who fought. There was a food supply that just run out. And so it's hard to feed all these. And so the Roman Empire, if they're fighting amongst themselves, they got to feed this bunch and that bunch and so forth. And so food became very scarce. The fact that there is a black horse here, I think, signifies this very thing. There was mourning. Black is suggestive of mourning. It's suggestive of sadness and heartache and all of that. And the civil wars would certainly bring this on. In the book of Jeremiah 14:2, Judah mourneth, and the gates thereof languisheth. They are black unto the ground, and the cry of Jerusalem is going up. There are different causes that will bring about mourning. Certainly death will. And we have listed here, famine and pestilences and oppression and so forth. The invasions of country or the invasion of their country amongst themselves. Again, if you look at it to a time that's closer to us, the Civil War, that was a devastation that happened to our country. And crops, the men had to go and fight, and so the crops were not planted and the crops were not harvested. Would that affect the church? It most certainly did. There was no food. The fact that he talks about, wheat being sold for so little or whatever, it tells us that there was a lot of scarcity and food was high in cost. The rider did not have a bow or a sword, but rather he had a set of balances in his hand. And that a scale, a set of balances. And so, things were very exact. You had to pay a lot of money to be able to have just the food that you would need to have. Balances or scales are symbols of justice and exactness. Things may be weighed because of their intrinsic value or their scarcity. All right. The third seal pictures the scarcity, I believe, of the necessities of life. This is that period of time right here that we're talking about. Buying so much wheat and barley for a shilling suggests that food was very costly and many would die because of the incapacity to purchase it. There was a period of time in the Roman Empire when extreme taxation, enormous prices, great sacrifices, wants and famines due to the destruction of armies and untilled land during the 92 years of civil war. The rule of Caracalla best describes that period of time. Now there's an overlapping here. This right here, this Civil War, all of these things kind of went on during this Civil War. It was the result of it. But Caracalla in 2:11 to 2:17, both in nature and in time, fits into this vision that John saw. He is referred to in history, Caracalla is referred to in history as the bloodthirsty tyrant, giving the empire a reign of terror. Here's what Gibbon said about it. He said, the most wealthy families were ruined by partial fines and confiscations, and the great body of his subjects oppressed by his ingenious and aggravated taxes. In such conditions, the church and all the Roman provinces would certainly be affected. The fourth seal. This is the fourth horse. When he had opened the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the fourth beast saying, come and see. And I looked, and behold, a pale horse. And his name that sat on him was Death, and hell followed him. And power was given unto them over the fourth part of the earth to kill with the sword, and with hunger, and with death, and with the beasts of the earth. On this horse was pale. And the one that sat upon him was called Death, and it says that hell or Hades followed him. People were dying so fast that Hades was just scooping them up as they died continuously. Was there such a time as this? There certainly was, as we will continue to look and to search for this period of time. Once again, it's a horse, but this time it is pale in color, the color of death. The rider is no longer a person with an implement of destruction, but rather death personified on this pale horse. The picture is that of death as a soldier making great victories against the efforts that man might make to stop him. There was no stopping this soldier of death as he rode on the pale horse. And Hades followed him. Hades is the unseen place of the dead. The idea is that so many would die that even Hades would have to follow to immediately swallow them up. They would have power over the fourth part of the earth, which suggests a great swath of people would die. They would kill with the sword, with famine, with pestilence, and wild beasts would devour many. The visions were fit so well. The next era of time that I want to describe to you, it is the reign of Galenus from AD 260 to 268. For 8 years here, this is the very thing that happened. Gibbon says of this period in Volume 1, page 299, he says, but the whole period was one of uninterrupted series of confusion and calamity. He goes on to say, but a long and a general famine was a calamity of a more serious kind. It was the inevitable consequence of rapine and oppression which extirpated the produce of the present and the hope of future harvest. Other causes, however, must have contributed to the furious plague that from the year of 250 to 265 raged without interruption to every province, to every city, and almost every family of the Roman Empire. Death was rampant during this period of time. He would go on to say in his writings about this period of time, during some time, listen to this, folks, this is history. during some time, 5,000 people died daily in Rome. That's just in Rome. We're dealing with a plague, in a sense. You know, the virus that we're dealing with that now. And you know, the news is just filled with all the people that died. We ain't anywhere near this right here. 5,000 people died in Rome. Many towns that had escaped the hands of the barbarians were entirely depopulated. Applying this most authentic fact to the most correct tables of mortality, it evidently proves that about half of the people of Alexandria had perished. And could we venture to extend the analogy to the other provinces, we might suspect that war, pestilence, famine had consumed in a few years the majority of the people. Do you remember what the seal said? A fourth part of the people was gone in this few short years, in this war, this famine that had taken place under the rulership of Gallienus. It had gotten so bad. And then we come to the fifth seal. Revelation 6 through 9. And when he had opened the fifth seal, I saw under the altar the souls of them that were slain for the word of God and for the testimony which they held. And they cried with a loud voice, saying, How long, O Lord, holy and true, dost thou not judge and avenge our blood on them that dwell in the earth? White robes were given unto every one of them, and it was said unto them that they should rest yet for a little season, until their fellow servants also and their brethren that should be killed as they were should be fulfilled. In this particular seal, the opening of the seal, things begin to change. There's no longer wars that are going on, but there's going to be changes that indeed will affect the church and the Roman Empire. The central idea of the first four seals was that of wars. The white horse, victory in Rome. The red horse, a disastrous for the empire because there was the civil wars that went on. The black horse, there was calamities, there was deaths and pestilences and famines. The pale horse, the plot thickened and the tremendous amount of people died because of all of the increase of these famines and diseases and so forth. And during these 2 centuries, the government was so fixed on fighting these wars that the attention was taken off of the Christians to some degree. The church was enjoying religious freedom that could not have otherwise been possible. Oh, they had their physical problems, but the church was enjoying physical freedom because they were concentrating on fighting themselves. You know, that's a lesson for us. If we concentrate on fighting ourselves, hard to tell what will happen. But they destroyed themselves by fighting themselves. There was a great spread of the church during these days. All right. With the fifth seal, the scene changes, though, because now we have these souls of those who had been beheaded, and we see them. The seal specifically will deal with the church, but it refers to those who were beheaded for the word of the Lord, those who had given their lives and sacrificed. And John did not see the bodies, but rather he saw the souls of these people. They are under the altar, a symbol of in the temple when you had the altar and you had the sacrifices that was placed upon that altar. And so these were people that were sacrificed. I mean, they lived out Romans, the 12th chapter, to a T when he says, give your bodies as a living sacrifice. These are the people that had done that John sees the souls of in this place. All right, now, let's continue on, though. Notice they were not asking for God's vengeance because they knew that God would indeed pass vengeance. They were just wondering, how long are you going to wait for this? How long are we going to wait for your vengeance to be carried out? The white robes, of course, represents victory and justification for them as the white robes were given to them. They were to wait for a little season until others had given their lives just like they had done. Now let's look at the fulfillment of this as best we can, again, to our time span. It evidently marks some notable era in the history of the church. At the ascension of Diocletian to the throne in AD 284, Diocletian. At the ascension of Diocletian to the throne, there was ushered in a new era. One of the most terrible, one of the most prolonged and most distinguished persecutions known to the church up to this point. Because now, they had done all the fighting, I guess they could amongst themselves, and all the results of it had come to pass. Diocletian comes in, and he now is going to turn his direction towards God's people. Diocletian was not at first against Christianity, but was persuaded by his aides because of the rapid growth of the church, and at last he became a leader to rid the world of Christianity. Diocletian, the emperor. Early in 303, of course this even comes on over here a little bit, but early in 303 there were secret councils held with Diocletian being at the head of them concerning the destruction of Christianity. Now remember, the reason for this is because Christianity had grown so much in the dominion, in the whole world, as a result of Rome fighting themselves. So now Diocletian realizes that we have a problem here. Christianity is getting bigger than the pagan world, and so we've got to do something about it. And in February the 23rd, we actually have a date here. February 23, 303, the first blow was struck against the Christians. An armed force. Now remember, because we'll talk about this, but we're probably dealing more with the apostate church here than we are true Christianity, because the apostate church, Roman Catholicism, and so forth had already kind of been developed by this time. But so that's why you'll hear some of the things that we're talking about. But there was an armed force, February the 23rd, sent forth to destroy the great church at Nicomedia and to burn the sacred books. This was the beginning of what is described as the greatest, most general destruction of the church. Here's what Gibbon writes about it. He says, the resentment or the fears of Diocletian at length transported him beyond the bounds of moderation, which he had hitherto preserved. And he declares in a series of cruel edicts his intention to abolish the Christian name. By the first of these edicts, the governors of the provinces were apprehended, all persons of ecclesiastical order, and the prisons destined for the vilest of criminals were soon filled with bishops, presbyters, deacons, readers, and exorcists. I don't know why the exorcist thing is put in there, but that's Gibbon's way, I guess, of describing those who maybe cast out sin or evil demons or whatever. But that's who that he turned his hatred towards, the hierarchy and the people that were in power at that time. Remember, we're talking about a seal where the souls are crying out, "How long, O Lord, are you going to wait to bring vengeance?" We're talking about the souls of those who were beheaded. This is that period of time that he's referring to. Here's what Gibbon continues on to say. By a second edict, the magistrates were to employ every method of severity which might reclaim them from their odious superstition and oblige them to return to the established worship of the gods. The rigorous order was extended by a subsequent edict to the whole body of Christians. So now it was not just the elders and the bishops and the presbyters and so forth, but the whole body of Christians now were in danger, and they would be taken out and put to the post and put to fire and so forth. So, I think beyond a doubt, this describes the crying out of the souls of these individuals under this fifth seal, the souls of those who said, "How long, O Lord, are you going to wait?" This has been referred to as the era of martyrs. No other occasion fits the symbol of the fifth seal better than this. The sixth seal, with this we're done. And I just want to point out a couple of things here. Behold, when he had opened the sixth seal, lo, there was a great earthquake. The sun became black as sackcloth of hair. The moon became as blood. The stars of the heaven fell into the earth, even as a fig tree casteth her untimely figs when she is shaken up of a mighty wind. The heaven departed as a scroll, and every mountain and island were moved from its place. Again, remember, this is all figurative language. This isn't actual islands moving, and this isn't heaven just being rolled up, the skies and so forth. But in verse 16, he said, "The mountains and rocks," this is what the people were saying, "fall on us and hide us from the face of him that sitteth on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb, for the great day of his wrath is come, and who shall be able to stand?" If our thinking is correct, we've come now here to about 284, and now we're in the year 300. And there is a great change that takes place in the year 300 that fits this description right here to a T. In this seal, when the seal was opened, there was an appearance of a great commotion. The material elements the mountains, the heavens rolled away and so forth. Again, it's all figurative, but they fell from their natural places. He saw the effect that such commotion had on the people of the earth at that time. They feared and they said, they cried for the rocks to fall upon them. We must remember again that this is all symbolic. If the fifth seal depicted the reign of Diocletian, then this sixth seal would depict a reign of something that would follow after him. And there certainly was something that followed after him. The sun, the moon, and the stars in prophecy, when you read about, even in the Old Testament, the sun, the moon, and the stars refers to figureheads. It refers to people that are of great power and so forth. The great lights, the stars, oftentimes simply refer to, political figures. The sun, the moon, and the stars. Keep that in mind. That's what the prophetic language it usually reveals to us. In the East, it was common to liken a king or an emperor to the sun or to the stars. And the stars were representative of rulers and princes. The blackness of the sun and the bloody hue of the moon point out scenes of mourning and bloodshed among rulers and princes. The falling of the stars would indicate that these individuals that were in high power, they fell. They lost their power. So he's talking about a period of time when great powers would be destroyed and taken away. And the heaven departed as a scroll. Every mountain and island would be moved out of their place. These were phrases that refer to changes in government. Changes in government, in prophetic language. And you kind of just have to take me from a word on that. But if you look in prophetic languages, that's what this means. When the heaven is rolled away, there is a power that is taken away. And the mountains refer to the governments. All kinds of men would be afraid. John saw all kinds of men cry. Mountains fall on us. Rocks fall on us. There was terror amongst the people. It is simply a poetic way of expressing the cry of distress. I don't think this was the cry of Christians. I believe this was the cry of the leaders, the powers of the Roman Empire, and those who had held on to the pagan ways of the world at that time. Here is what I believe the fulfillment is. These tremendous changes transpired during the reign of a man by the name of Constantine in 307 to 337. This period of time harmonizes with the events of the seals. In 308, the empire was divided between 6 emperors. They fought amongst them. It got narrowed down to just 6. In 313, it was reduced to 2 between Constantine and Licinius. And they had it out. They fought it out. And finally, Licinius was a champion of paganism, but he became defeated by Constantine in 323. And Constantine became the sole emperor of the Roman Empire. This is when people begin to get a little bit afraid. This is when people, of course, were jolted. This is when the heavens began to roll away. Since Constantine was favorable to Christianity, it was really a war between Christianity and paganism. The defeat of Licinius caused great mourning and distress because he was the advocate of paganism, but Constantine was the advocate of Christianity. In the Edict of Milan, this is a ruling of the Roman Empire. In the Edict of Milan in AD 313, privilege was granted for each man to worship as he saw fit, and none were prevented from embracing Christianity. This was a law that was put in force. This caused an uproar in the then known world because Christianity had not had this position for a long, or I guess maybe forever. In 321 AD, he decreed that Sunday, the day the Christians observed. Now, the Seventh-day Adventists, they believe that Sunday comes about because of Constantine. No, it didn't come about because of the law of Constantine. Constantine took the day that Christians worshiped and he made it a law in the land. It had already been observed, but Constantine made it a law that worship was to be upon this day, and in towns and businesses there was to be no labor on Sunday. I grew up in that time. Well, that time went on for a long time. I grew up in a time you didn't go buy gas on Sunday. You didn't go to the grocery store on Sunday because there was no stores open on Sunday. So that law had been carried on for years and years and years that had been established by Constantine. Of course, it changed, through the various rulers and so forth, but he established it here. Gibbon refers to this era. He seated Christianity on the throne of the Roman Empire. That's what Mr. Gibbon says about it. All right, now we're almost done. 319, before his final triumph, he had decreed that his mother's religion should be tolerated and acknowledged as the acknowledged faith of the empire. The pagans began to feel that theirs was a doomed religion, and it was. In 325, he abolished by decree, by law now, the bloody combat of the gladiators where men killed other men for the amusement of the people, and this had been a Roman institution that had existed for 1,000 years. Constantine put an end to it. In 331, he decreed that pagan religion should exist no longer and that the temple should be leveled or turned into churches. You talk about the pagan world crying, rocks, mountains, fall on us. They were mourning this situation because their world was being turned upside down. At the same time, the old Roman laws were remodeled according to the precepts of the Christian religion. He moved the Roman capital, which had been a capital in Rome for 11 centuries. He moved it to Constantinople, a city that he named after his own self. Surely, all this political and spiritual upheaval could fit the description of the sixth seal, where the scrolls of heaven was rolled away, and the stars and the moon and so forth failed. All of these great men that at one time had power failed, and so it had come to an end. I'm going to stop there. I got a few more slides, but we're going to. This is the beginning of the seven trumpets that are blown. But we've got you to the sixth seal. Now, the danger with this, the church got a reprieve again. You know, it has had its ups and downs. It got a reprieve again. But as I said, it was a bittersweet thing, because this was the beginning of where the church began to be controlled by the state. And it was the very step that takes it into the area where, it would become a hierarchy and it was ruled by the government. And God never intended that to be. Well, that's our lesson tonight. We've taken you on a little journey again, giving you some information. That information's in this little booklet if you want to study it further. But we hope that it's been interesting to you. It's interesting to me to see how the church has gone through its various stages. We never know the minds of those who are present. If you're here under the sound of our voice, we would bid you to come and to obey the gospel of Jesus Christ, and or either that or repent of wrongs that you have committed. So either of the two classes, won't you come while we stand and while we sing?